Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Well, it's a year ago since lockdown started, but let's look ahead at what could be one of the big emerging industries for the UK. Artificial intelligence. Can we excel at it? A nation that actually kept track and trace on Excel on a spreadsheet and then stuffed up algorithms over the A-levels last year. Are we really good at processing data and understanding it? Well, former Office for AI advisor Seb Krier says there's absolutely no reason why we can't be one of the world leaders in this space, so long as we get the public behind it.
But yeah, in general, I think whilst people are broadly supportive of kind of AI and data and so on, there are some kind of fears and legitimate ones about how AI can be used, or what kind of data goes into these AI systems, and just transparency around the whole process.
Plus, digital money. Should central banks be in on that game if they're not already? Jerome Powell from the Fed talked down cryptocurrencies yesterday.
And I think with crypto assets, the public needs to understand the risks. The principal thing is there's the volatility. There's also the outsized energy requirement for mining, and the fact that they're not backed by anything, which I mentioned.
But is he talking it all down because he's worried about the future for established currencies? And if they lose the power and influence, how do central banks produce money to cover government spending, like the extra $3 trillion that Joe Biden plans to spend on infrastructure? That's on top of the $1.9 trillion he just secured for the recovery package. It's all coming up today. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of March, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business. Making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
So there was an interesting discussion by BIS in the United States yesterday about digital currencies, which could turn banking on its head. But I'm not sure anyone is entirely sure in what way, what the effects are, what the benefits are, and also what the downsides are. And it's all really confusing, muddying the waters of what money is. I mean, already we've got a few different types of money, and now we're adding perhaps 2 or 3 other ones. So first of all, we've got coins and notes, which are sitting in your wallet, possibly not being used much during the lockdown. This is money issued by the Bank of England in our case. It represents a very small proportion of the total money in circulation. Then there's the vast majority of money, which is really a digital currency in itself, in that it's really sitting on spreadsheets in banks. It's sitting in your bank account, or maybe it's the money that you owe on a housing loan. All of this is money that largely has been created by commercial banks. I mean, they don't have all that money sitting in their bank, which is why they need to ensure they've got enough physically in reserve to counter any run on the banks. But most of it is spreadsheet money that's been created by the banks. Then now we've got cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which are very volatile, obviously, and effectively they're created out of nothing. But some people seem to think that they are going to hold their value because there is so much other money being created by reserve banks. And then there are what are called stable coins, which are like cryptocurrencies, but they're more stable because they're actually backed by something else. Like they've got assets that have got some value sitting behind them, like precious metals, for example, or other currencies like the US dollar, which is seen as the world's reserve currency. And now there's this discussion about whether central banks should actually be issuing a digital currency as well, because the relationship at the moment is central banks have a relationship with commercial banks, and commercial banks have a relationship with the customer. So what would happen if the central banks actually had a direct relationship with the customer? How could they do that without disintermediating the banking sector, which some people might say isn't a bad thing anyway? Well, Jerome Powell from the Fed at this conference yesterday wasn't too keen on Bitcoin for reasons we're about to hear, but also he doesn't see any need to rush into this idea of a central bank digital currency, the CBDCs as they're called.
Take a step back and say that our work on CBDCs is not primarily motivated by the appearance on the scene of cryptocurrencies and stablecoins. It really is fundamentally, technology has made it possible for us to offer a new form of trusted money and that sovereign anchor that has been so important for economic development for a very long time. And we're looking carefully at whether to do that. So turning to your question, crypto assets, which we call them crypto assets, they're highly volatile, see Bitcoin, and therefore not really useful as a store of value, and they're not backed by anything. they're more of an asset for speculation. So they're also not particularly in use as a means of payment. It's more a speculative asset that's essentially a substitute for gold rather than for the dollar. And I think with crypto assets, the public needs to understand the risks. The principal thing is there's the volatility. There's also the outsized energy requirement for mining, and the fact that they're not backed by anything, which I mentioned. Turning to stable coins, so to the extent a stable coin is backed by sovereign currencies of leading nations, that's certainly an improvement over crypto assets, I would say. But nonetheless, where does the credibility come from? It comes from that sovereign currency that is the backstop. The thing is, existing sovereign currencies are issued with the benefit of the public in mind. The potentially fast and wide adoption of a global stablecoin, potentially a global currency governed only by the incentives of a private company, is something that will deserve and will receive the highest level of regulatory expectations. And is regulation where it needs to be on global stablecoins yet? It's not, but we're making progress. Nonetheless, stablecoins may have a role to play with appropriate regulation, but that role will not be to form the basis of a new global monetary system.
So this is going to be quite a discussion, isn't it? A new global monetary system. This is one that the Bitcoiners are already pushing, this line that fiat money, this is the sovereign currency that's issued by central banks, and they can produce as much of it as they want. It's increasing in volume, and some argue that, the increase in money is going to devalue that money because they've been reading probably the wrong economics textbooks. But if you read those books, it says that's what happens. So these people are looking for other currencies that are going to hold more value, particularly as the Fed is buying up and creating so much money. So central banks obviously don't want to see other currencies develop in competition, because managing their currency is how they control interest rates and financial stability. So you've got to have a sovereign currency to do that. So case in point, Joe Biden's administration has just pumped $1.9 trillion into the economy with its recovery package. The debt ensuing from that is issued as government bonds on the open market, and a large chunk of that these days will probably be bought by the central bank. And it can do that without any competition for other currencies being used en masse in the United States, because people still have confidence in and are reliant on the US dollar. But this approach is really being tested now, because news broke yesterday that Joe Biden's administration is planning on an infrastructure spending program that is going to cost another $3 trillion. Now, that is $1 trillion more than people were expecting. So a lot of this is going to be debt. It's going to be issued through more bonds, and the central bank will probably end up scooping a lot of that too. But the bank can't do that if the currency is weakened, not because there's so much money swilling around, but because people lose confidence in it and start using other international currencies, other digital currencies like Bitcoin, or perhaps a more stable coin, which is what stable coins are. A coin that's more stable. So watch this space, because this is going to get very interesting, I think. In fact, I think this is something we'll do on a Steve Keen podcast. If you haven't caught up yet, I do a weekly podcast with Professor Steve Keen. It's called Debunking Economics. I think we might cover this in the next couple of weeks. Now, if you live in America and you weren't convinced about the idea of getting a vaccine, I'm not sure why. Maybe you haven't realized that it could actually save your life. Well, here's another reason. If it's not saving your life, here's another reason to have a vaccine. Krispy Kreme donuts are now saying from yesterday, anyone who shows their COVID-19 vaccination record card will receive a free original glazed donut, and they'll do it every day at any of their 369 stores every day for the rest of the year. So if the virus doesn't kill you, then all the sugar from daily donuts, you also get a coffee as well, that'll probably finish you off. I mean, a year ago, we were paranoid, weren't we, this time last year? We were trying to get fit because we thought the virus was attacking people who are basically overweight. Now we've had the jab. I mean, just go for it. That coffee, that Krispy Kreme donut. What I love is I thought I'd have a look and see, well, what's that done to Krispy Kreme donut share price, giving away all this free product? But they're not listed anymore. They've actually been bought by a German company, and you'll love this. Jab Holdings is the name. That is a marvelous piece of nominative determinism, isn't it? Another piece of nominative determinism is the man standing for UKIP in the London mayoral elections. It's Dr. Peter Gammons. The Twitter handle, Gammons for London. He wants to go into this election promising to end lockdowns. Yet another one. I mean, they are going to end anyway. This is like having our policy to end World War II. It's over. And this will be over soon as well. But he's on all about that. Plus, what about this for forward thinking from the Gammon?
Some of my policies include get London moving again. Did you know that under London there's about 2 million miles of unused tunnels? I want to see those utilised to provide safe walkways, safe cycle lanes, and the world's first underground pod system. Yeah?
Yep, he's in that case. So that 2 million miles of unused tunnels, if that sounds a bit unlikely, this is actually it's 4 million kilometres. That is the number from the land registry data that came out a few years ago. But a lot of this isn't just tunnels. This is conduits of some sort under London. So we're including that water pipes, gas lines, electricity wires, telecommunications cables. I guess we could widen them, couldn't we? For almost exactly the same cost as building completely new tunnels from scratch. What a great idea this is. Because we have Gammons running our media, let's have a Gammon for London with such inspirational talk like that. And he is inspirational because he is a Presbyterian motivational speaker. What a combination that is. I mean, I think I'd rather have Lawrence Fox, who we talked about yesterday, who, by the way, didn't have enough nominations for the mayoral race, so he's out of it all. And in the polls, Gammons for UKIP is 2%. Look, Mayor Khan is on 53%, so it looks like he's coming back. He's actually 9% higher than he was at the last election. 53% of the vote, actually a majority. That hardly ever happens. Like if we look at the last general election, Boris Johnson got 42% of the vote. Actually, just 2% more than Jeremy Corbyn. That gives you some context to it all, doesn't it? So our main story today, helping boost the artificial intelligence industry. This is perhaps a safer bet for Britain's future than getting cyclists to use crumbling old sewage tunnels or getting pedestrians to crawl through electricity conduits. Smart idea. But AI is all about intelligence, artificial intelligence. It seems it is everywhere, and we know that there's going to be a lot more of it as well. Although the stuff we tend to hear does seem to be associated with trying to get us to buy more stuff online, doesn't it? I mean, Amazon has been doing this for years with those prompts that say if you like this, you'll probably also like this. Is that AI? Well, we'll get to that in a second with Seb Krier, who's a former head of regulation at the Office for AI, which is a government body that's been helping to set out Britain's AI strategy. And these days, Seb is a director of Dataphysix, an independent AI advisory firm. It's his own business. And he's just written a report for the Entrepreneurs Network, which is an independent think tank. In it, he outlines 8 recommendations for how Britain can do better at AI. And a lot of it seems to revolve around being more open at a time when nationalism and closed borders seem to be the way of things. So good luck with that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, of course. On top of that, of course, there's all the privacy concerns that go with this space as well. So are we best at AI, Seb? I mean, I would have thought it'd be the United States, or perhaps it would be China. I know they're doing a lot in this space as well, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think we're actually pretty good and definitely punching above our weight. So, the US and China are definitely leading internationally in terms of kind of development and deployment of AI, but the UK is doing really, really good. And particularly on the R&D side, we've had lots of very, very good companies and startups like DeepMind and Benevolent AI and many others, and got a very strong academic ecosystem here as well. So we're definitely doing very well. Yeah. Now
that word ecosystem, I guess, is important to it all, isn't it? Because it is all about using data and making sure that various strands of data from various sources all work together well. I mean, that's how you feed the AI machine, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you need a lot of high quality data sets for that, but that's just one component. I think the field of AI is actually quite broad and diverse, and you need quite a lot of different profiles in there, from people with expertise in computer science, in statistics, or even in the humanities. So, the UK has been pretty good at that. A lot of different set of skills and very good universities.
So my example of Amazon saying, if you like this, you'll probably like that. Is that AI?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it tends to be, and there's a lot of these kind of recommendation systems that, obviously learn from your past behavior and data sets and then kind of predict what you might like next. So that's one example of it, but the same kind of technology is used for, a lot of other different use cases.
And are the public generally supportive of this? Because we only ever, it seems, hear about AI in a negative light. And I don't know why that is. I guess it is because we get concerned about privacy, or it's just we only hear about it when it goes wrong. Might be one of those things that when it works fine, we're all happy with it. But I mean, that word algorithm became a dirty word last year, didn't it? Mainly because of the, trying to apply those A-level grades when the people couldn't sit exams.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of a mixed space. I think, firstly, there's this kind of paradox of, whenever something is kind of AI and tends to work and get scaled, no one really calls it AI anymore. So that, sometimes makes it a bit difficult understanding what people mean by algorithms or AI. But yeah, in general, I think whilst people are broadly supportive of kind of AI and data and so on, there are some kind of fears and legitimate ones about how AI can be used, or what kind of data goes into these AI systems, and the just transparency around the whole process. And so I think there's divided opinions, let's say, but broadly I'd say it's mostly supportive. And I think to ensure it remains that way, which at least like bolster public confidence, there's definitely a few things government could be doing to push for public trust and trustworthiness more generally.
Well, I worked in the advertising space for a long time, many years ago, and even back then, like we're talking a couple of decades ago, and we used a lot of data, like census data, and whatever we could get our hands on, basically, to try and segment the audience. It was all aggregated data, but then we'd disaggregate it down to getting down to postcode level, so we could mail out stuff. And that was all based on information that we gathered. And we knew at the time, if people knew what we were doing, they wouldn't be happy about this. They'd see this as being an invasion of privacy. And I think those concerns still apply, don't they?
Yeah, no, I think that, there's definitely lots of consideration about, how you source the data and what you end up doing with it. But I think there's, now we also do have GDPR. I mean, despite Brexit, there's, we're still kind of bound by GDPR and the Data Protection Act here. And there's, some quite strong provisions on, what kind of data you can collect and the consent needed and so on. But yeah, sometimes, it can feel a bit creepy if you find lots of different data sets, put them together and find some interesting correlations or things that you wouldn't have otherwise kind of found out. So I think there's still some gray areas, but overall there's quite a strong privacy framework in the UK.
My favourite one was that, from census data, you can never tell how old people are because that information isn't released down to the individual household, but you can actually look at the names of people and then you can predict their age by their name. Like I'm called Phil, and that probably means I'm in my 50s because no one's been called Phil since the 1960s. So there's all that sort of stuff that goes on. So I guess the main concern is in most people's minds, we've watched Terminator movies, and it's when AI starts to make value judgments, which are based on the evidence that they've got. So I've been watching this TV series called The 100. I don't know if you've seen it, where an AI system sees that humans are destroying the planet. So quite logically, it decides it's going to kill all the humans. Yes. You can't fault the logic, but it's not a decision we'd come up with. So and that is the concern, isn't it? Algorithms, data, value judgments. We don't want them to do the last one.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very it's a good question actually. I mean, the Terminator reference is obviously a little bit overused, but I think that a lot of the AI we currently use is what's called kind of narrow AI. So it's particular systems very good at doing one particular thing, but they're not particularly good at generalizing or kind of performing as well in different environments or contexts. So I think at the moment these types of risks are perhaps a bit kind of, well, not really real right now, but there's the whole point of the field is to go towards general AI and far more kind of intelligent AI. And down the line, whether it's in kind of 20 years, 50 or 100, there's definitely, legitimate concerns about, how is general AI going to be developed and what are the risks associated with that. And there's a whole field dedicated to studying that, I think, AI safety in general. And like you say, the value judgment bit, well, I think that the real difficulty here is ensuring, it's called, I think, the value alignment problem, is ensuring the AI agent knows what exactly you mean when you give it a particular, direction or a thing to do. So, if I think one example used is if you ask some robot or something in the future to just clean your room, not expecting it to, or your kitchen to take a baby and throw it away or something, So being aware of the context and what's right and what's not, what's acceptable and not, and so on, is kind of difficult to actually encode. And lot of other different risks coming up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of that becomes transparency, doesn't it? So that people know exactly what these judgments are being made on.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we're looking for a definition of AI, that's what I'm struggling with. Is it simply using information to try and predict things before they happen? Is that what it's all about?
I mean, more or less. I mean, I think that it's quite hard to settle down on a definition of AI, particularly as the field evolves quite fast, and different techniques kind of are more used at different times. Deep learning and neural networks recently, for example. So I generally tend to, we've worked on this in government with the Alan Turing Institute to try to find a definition that's kind of, that makes sense, isn't overly, too precise as to be out of date in 5 years, but still not, too general either. And I think we essentially saw it as a collection, or a set of fields that, including computer science, statistics, humanities, and so on, as I said earlier, that seek to develop technologies that automate behavior that we traditionally believe required intelligence, essentially. So and that includes a prediction component. Yeah.
So you've got your 8. I'm not sure we're going to have time to do all 8, but let's have a stab at a few of them. I mean, you talked about the importance of, in your first one in your report, you talked about the importance of the ecosystem. So having a cloud that everyone who's working in this space can access, so they can share that, help build that ecosystem and start to share data sets. Is that the idea?
Well, I think it's essentially when you when you run an AI algorithm, that requires kind of a lot of compute power, computing power. And that ends up being quite expensive. And, a lot of the great kind of innovations in AI, like GPT-3 and so on, require quite a lot of compute power, and that's very expensive. So that means that private companies, large private companies, are often well placed to do that, whereas universities are a little bit more cash poor and it's a bit trickier for them. So having some sort of kind of system, or a national cloud system, or like cloud credits to award to researchers, for example, or third sector organizations, that would make it obviously cheaper for them to want to do these kind of big experiments, or to scrutinize and look at commercial AI models and so on. And, would kind of democratize the field a little bit, meaning that if you're an academic and interesting and trying something like GPT-3, you don't necessarily need to leave to the private sector to do that. Not that leaving to the private sector is a bad thing, but you want to have, the flexibility of deciding in what context you want to do this kind of work.
So almost like an R&D subsidy, isn't it? Where the biggest cost is actually the computer power that you're saying there. So
essentially.
Yeah, makes sense. Also, opening up data assets. So like the stuff the ONS are holding, that sort of thing, presumably, and health records, tax records. But this is where we get the big privacy concerns coming in, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think, obviously you shouldn't kind of open just any data and all data, but there's a lot of, data out there that could be opened with minimal risk, or at least, some data sets or some more sensitive ones that could be potentially, anonymized, or at least go through a certain process. I think there's a lot of data sets the ONS has that you can't necessarily just download from the website, but you need to access in a secure environment. So you can make more of this kind of data available as well. So as in, sensitive data available in that private environment. And these kind of data sets really help, I think, researchers, academics, and startups as well in coming up with new solutions and new insights. So, I think there's some very good examples of Taiwan, providing like the live data and APIs, and that kind of stuff is particularly useful for a lot of, AI applications in smart cities, for example.
Right. So finance data would be an example, wouldn't it, I guess? Because there's something that's always changing. I mean, I was thinking about the census that's coming up, but I mean, that's just a snapshot, isn't it? And I'm sure you can get hold of most of that. But, it's once every 5 or 10 years, whatever it is. But stuff like financial data from banks, I mean, that is ever changing. If it was anonymized, I mean, that could be a real contribution, particularly for sort of economics modeling, but more generally, anything to do with society, really. I mean, it all revolves around how we're spending our money.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's quite a few examples of how this is done in the financial sector. Actually, there's the kind of the open banking initiative, and there's kind of regulatory sandboxes that the FCA has also kind of developed. And that kind of ecosystem really helps fintech startups, for example. And I think having that in lots of other sectors would make the same kind of solutions available more widely.
And you're saying explore innovative, friendly regulatory markets as another one of your points, meaning that you don't necessarily think that we are one of them. Which countries do you have in mind?
Well, it's not so much real countries. I think this recommendation was more around how. So based on a pen of paper that was written by Jack Clark and Gillian Hatfield, it's essentially kind of a model of regulation where, instead of government needing lots of machine learning expertise and saying exactly how, what needs to be done and how, which is quite a difficult thing in the field. It's this is kind of the traditional command and control model. You can have a different model where you got essentially private regulators. So government sets general outcomes, for example. Let's say facial recognition needs to undergo XYZ testing, and data must comply with something else. And these private regulators then essentially, a company essentially can decide how it wants to implement or respect that, and the private regulators check that. So you've got a kind of an in-between layer, which allows for a little bit more kind of competition and more kind of startups and essentially kind of groups doing a lot of the testing, creating tools and frameworks and so on. So, it's a bit tricky to kind of quickly explain that in 10 minutes, but but broadly,
all of this is.
yeah, exactly. But it's worth looking at in the paper, and there's a nice little illustration there that helps. But it's broadly a model where essentially you're kind of drifting a bit away from the just government deciding everything in a really detailed manner, and instead having a more layered model, which you already have in the UK, for example, with lawyers and the SRA. So the Solicitors Regulation Authority kind of sets broad outcomes-based requirements, and then
that sort of kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because I mean, actually, in the legal profession, the government is all about law, isn't it? I mean, that's actually what they're there to create laws, but how those laws are then implemented falls out of the hands of the government and into the legal profession, and they develop it themselves. So you're sort of saying we should be doing the same thing when it comes to managing this space as well. So what about GDPR then? That thing that the EU left behind for us. You want that to be reviewed? I mean, it drives me mad every time you go to a website and you get a pop-up. So did GDPR go too far, do you think?
I think, well, in some respects, perhaps, yeah. But also it's been, it was, I think, created quite early in 2012, where a lot of this AI stuff wasn't so dominant. And I think as a result, the legislation is slightly out of date, or doesn't work as well with kind of a lot of ways data is currently being used right now. So I think what it needs is a bit of an OS update. It's very good in many respects, obviously, and it's good that we're pushing for legislation that kind of respects privacy and so on. But it obviously shouldn't be done at the expense of other things, or at least to be unduly onerous on SMEs and so on. So I think ordering some sort of review and working with the EU to kind of update it would be quite a good thing. I mean, both for the EU and the UK. I mean, the EU's kind of looking into that, or actually, I think Axel Voss, which is one of the creators of GDPR, has been saying the same thing, and I think that would also allow both the EU and the UK to kind of catch up a bit, or at least not fall behind the US and China.
Right, and take the pop-ups off the website as well. You're at it. What about getting the right talent into the country? Then you're saying that should be done through scholarships. I mean, I guess in the short term that makes a great deal of sense, but this has got to be a big opportunity for us to grow our own homegrown talent in this space as well, if we focused on getting the right subjects done at school. Obviously, that's a generational change.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was actually an article today on the BBC about the kind of shortage of digital talent in the UK and the workforce more generally. I think there's been a lot of work done by the Office for AI in the last 2 years on kind of PhDs and an industry-funded master's program and so on. So a lot of universities and so on are kind of obviously offering more courses in kind of AI, computer science, statistics, and so on, and maths. And that's a great thing, but that takes quite a long time to see the fruits of that. It probably take like 5-10 years or so. And so in the meantime, and just generally, I think importing talent and great ideas and immigration from across the world would really kind of ensure we're able to kind of catch up, because we're falling behind, and there's a lot of evidence out there showing how immigration can be particularly impactful and positive on many measures of innovation, prosperity, and so on. And so I think one way of doing that is lowering barriers to talent and offering scholarships and essentially trying to attract talent from across the world, really.
I have to say, all of this makes far more sense than the idea of free ports, which are basically, I mean, I guess you could use free ports to do this as well as a way of avoiding tax. But, this is the future rather than trying to rebuild a manufacturing base, isn't it? You've got shunning protectionism and leading global AI governance efforts. So I imagine protectionism, which seems to be pretty much in vogue at the moment, particularly in the UK, I should imagine that would be a bit of a hindrance right now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's you see that, obviously not just in kind of AI and tech, but there's a bit of a national kind of retreats in some countries, including the UK, and you see that in the kind of tech discourse as well, with things like I've heard things like using British, providing British data to British companies or that kind of thing, or these kind of cloud initiatives that try to kind of have a EU or UK only kind of component. There's a whole host of proposals, and I think it's kind of important to shun these kind of things and try to look at things kind of globally. I think that's the difficulty with tech. I mean, tech is very cross-border, it's very global, and a lot of these protectionist policies don't really kind of work and don't really make sense and tend to be kind of lose-lose at the end of the day.
Well, I guess at the root of all of this, I mean, a lot of it is to do with human behavior, isn't it? It's using data that's looking at human behavior, and human behavior is pretty similar around the world. I mean, obviously, there are differences from country to country. We want to study that too. And on that, public trust. I mean, this is a big issue, isn't it? Particularly when it comes to the public sector. We've got the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. I'm not sure how good they're doing at their job right now, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of public support. I mean, you look at the track and trace app, for example. A lot of people didn't do it because they didn't trust the government with their data. We hear that time and time again, don't we? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think the CDI has done some really, really interesting work, but it might be the issue is that a lot of what they've been doing is also being done with a lot of other organizations and institutes around the UK and Europe. So I feel like their efforts could actually be kind of more focused on not necessarily holding government to account, but also just scrutinizing how government does a lot of that and ensuring that the public feels that AI and data is being kind of done well in government. And this public trust element is both very difficult, but also to kind of to do, but also to just track and to evidence. But it's really necessary. I think Taiwan's been doing, again, I'm using Taiwan twice now, but there was a really good talk from Audrey Tang at the Future of Humanity Institute not long ago. But they're really taking this kind of element of public trust really seriously, and that in their case really helps the use and adoption of a lot of these COVID tools, for example. Whereas Singapore, on the other hand, initially promised that the track and trace type data would only be used for COVID and only be accessed for COVID related purposes. And later on turned out that they were using that for, policing and so on. So, and that really kind of obviously affected public trust.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it gets down to transparency, doesn't it? Hey, look, we have got through all 8 because we'll do the final one as well. I didn't think we would, but hey, I thought this is, we're going to get it's going to get too way down in the detail on 1 or 2 of these, but we've got through them all. The final one to do with intellectual property, making sure the IP regime is fit for AI. I mean, this is something new, isn't it? So I imagine, IP laws are going to be very out of date, aren't they?
Yeah, potentially. I think there's, there was a consultation recently from the Intellectual Property Office looking at that. So that's obviously really encouraging and good. But yeah, there's a few things that could be tweaked. For example, a lot of AI can be developed through mining, data online with images, text, and so on, and you might need an update on that front too, because currently this is, doing so could potentially be a breach of copyright, and that would not incentivize more kind of AI use cases. And so you might need kind of an exemption from this copyright for text and data mining to for-profit users. So currently, nonprofits can do that fine. And I think you can extend that to the private sector as a whole too, and would be fine, I think, here.
Is this something that the UK could shine at, do you think? I mean, could this be something that distinguishes us, rather than just being a country which is led by the city? Rather than us focusing on moving money around, we actually could be making more use of data more effectively and actually selling models to the rest of the world? Yeah,
I mean, definitely. I think, having kind of this exemption, I think, would enable us to be more competitive, at least in the creation of such technologies. And yeah, particularly on, natural language processing type stuff, which we're already very good at. This would, cement this position even more and allow a lot more uses, particularly given, how English is spoken kind of across the world, and a lot of, the internet is in English. So a lot to be, to be leveraged here.
Yeah. And is the government behind it? Do you think that there's you've worked with, in a government department, is there or a quasi-government department, I guess is what we used to call a quango, probably. Yeah. Is there an understanding within the centre of government, do you think, about the importance of all of this?
As in, the IP stuff specifically, or the rest of the...
No, across the whole board, across the opportunity for AI for the UK.
Yeah, there is. Certainly the office of AI there is, but I think more broadly in government, there is a need of a bit of an update, I think, in the civil service and kind of politically for this whole, AI and tech stuff to be a bit more... to be understood a bit more widely and more broadly, I think. I think, you had schemes in the US like Tech Congress, which allowed kind of technologists to work with policymakers, and that kind of stuff would be really useful to ensure that all this stuff is just kind of understood, but also for that to be kind of just a component of the system that, so we wouldn't need these reports that often.
And you know what? I think that idea that you've got that one-liner that really succinctly describes what AI is so that everybody can understand it and get behind it would be a good move, wouldn't it? But we've helped perhaps a little bit of that today. Good to talk, Seb. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much. It was great speaking to you.
And finally, very quickly, today's newspaper headlines for Tuesday, the 23rd of March, 2021. Today, the Times leads with the news that the overseas travel ban is going to be extended until July under draft laws that were published yesterday. It is, of course, exactly a year ago today that we went into lockdown. £5,000 fine for holidays abroad, says the Daily Mail. A day to reflect on lockdowns and the loss of 126,000 lives is the front page of The Guardian. They also report on a report from the British Academy that warns Britain faces a COVID decade of social and cultural upheaval marked by growing inequality and deepening economic deprivation. And it calls for major changes to the way society is run. Boris warns Europe's third wave will hit UK, says the Daily Express. Britain's year of loss in the Independent. Astronaut in the Metro. This is the good news. No deaths or serious COVID after the Oxford jab, as we were saying earlier on. Finds a major US trial. And China on the front page of the FT. Western sanctions on China over the Uyghurs sparks instant retaliation. The treatment of the Uyghur Muslims has been seen travel bans and asset freezes imposed on 4 high-level Chinese officials and a security organisation in Xinjiang that's got connections to the internment camp system. Watch that story develop. Plus, Deliveroo maps out a route to an £8.8 billion valuation in bumper London listing. We might dip into that one tomorrow. I got an email on that today. You can go and have a look at their prospectus. We might do that. Also tomorrow, which consumer behaviours that have shifted during the pandemic are here to stay? Futurologist Tom Cheeseman-Wright joins me for that one. In the meantime, have a good day. See you tomorrow.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthebusiness or wherever